Self-esteem is defined as the way one feels about oneself or has certain beliefs about oneself. For example, I need to feel better about myself. If I don't, I cannot go out and attract a partner that I like. I cannot have the friendships that I want. I cannot succeed in business. I cannot succeed academically. It is important that I learn to feel better about myself and get a better self-esteem, right? Self-esteem is basically having certain beliefs and feelings about ourselves. For many years, for decades even, since the self-esteem movement happened in the 1970s, we've been obsessed with boosting self-esteem. We think that high self-esteem is very important. It can make us succeed better in life. It can impact our performance. It can create our social reality, and it can even impact those around us. But is this really true? According to Roy Baumeister, American social psychologist and researcher, having a high self-esteem does not necessarily mean that we are better people or that we perform better. He reviewed 200 articles, 200 research papers on self-esteem to see whether high self-esteem did have an important positive impact on success in life. And here are some of the things that he found. The modest correlations between self-esteem and school performance do not indicate that high self-esteem leads to good performance. Efforts to boost self-esteem have not been shown to improve academic performance and sometimes may be counterproductive. Occupational success may boost self-esteem rather than the reverse. Laboratory studies have generally failed to find that self-esteem causes good task performance, with the important exception that high self-esteem facilitates persistence after failure. Self-esteem has not been shown to predict the quality or duration of relationships. So according to Roy Baumeister, self-esteem may not have such a big impact on success in life, on happiness, on good relationships. Improving self-esteem or having high self-esteem is not necessarily that important for achieving success in life or feeling happy. Other factors may be more important than self-esteem to feel happy, to feel content, to feel fulfilled, and to achieve success in life, including having good relationships. And that factor is to have self-control. A while ago, I did an interview with Dr. Dan Kolobianski, a leading researcher in self-critical rumination, self-esteem, and metacognitions. And he told me something that was very interesting and that stuck with me. He said that it's not that people with high self-esteem judge themselves favorably. It's not that they have all these great thoughts about themselves. The only difference between those and those people with low self-esteem is that people with high self-esteem just don't judge themselves. And we do know that people with low self-esteem tend to do certain things that maintain their low self-esteem. And the theory is if they didn't do those things, they may naturally increase their self-esteem or have a healthy self-esteem. So in this video, we're going to identify some of these unhelpful strategies that could maintain low self-esteem and look into how to begin to reduce them. And instead, focus on something that might be even more important than boosting self-esteem, which is exercise self-control. To exercise self-control means to control your mind, to control how you react to certain things. Now, a lot of people have self-critical thoughts. It can be critical thoughts like, I am not good enough, or I didn't do as well as I should have. It is also very normal for people to think about their thoughts, to think about their self-critical thoughts. The way we think about them could be reviewing past actions. What are some of the things that I did and how did I have wanted them to turn out instead? Or it could be going over things, evaluate things about ourselves that we don't feel proud of or ashamed of. However, thinking about them for too long and not believing that we can stop thinking about them is what causes long-term problems and maintains low self-esteem. So here's some of the ways that we think about and deal with our self-critical thoughts that maintain low self-esteem. The first one is to criticize ourselves or engage in something called self-critical rumination. Self-critical rumination is to grab onto a self-critical thought and start dwelling more on that. So for example, if a thought pops up like, that was stupid, what I said, or I always fail, I am not good enough. Self-critical rumination would be to grab onto that thought and then build on that. Yeah, and I shouldn't have said that. Why did I do that? Why do I always say stupid things? Why can't I perform better? What is wrong with me? I'm not a very intelligent person. Other people are more intelligent than me. So this is self-critical rumination. And needless to say, dwelling on self-critical thoughts long enough is bound to make us feel bad and insecure about ourselves. People with low self-esteem also seem to engage in worrying. Usually the worrying is about the consequences, the negative future consequences of suffering from low self-esteem, or the negative future consequences of these self-critical thoughts. For example, if I have a self-critical thought that I am not intelligent, then my worrying could go something like, well, if my colleagues are going to find out, my boss will not give me a promotion. What if I'm unable to attract a partner that will be interested in me and find me attractive, and so on. So the worrying can also be about the fact that one has low self-esteem and the consequences of not improving that. If I don't feel better about myself, I can never go out and date someone and attract someone I like. If I don't feel good about myself, I can never start that business. Then I'll forever be unfulfilled or forever be unable to provide for my family, for example. Other strategies that people use with low self-esteem is to threat monitor. Threat monitoring can go in different directions. It can be internal, where we monitor for certain thoughts about ourselves because we want to look out for self-critical thoughts. So we kind of go scan our bodies, scan our minds for any thoughts of self-criticism because we want to avoid that. Threat monitoring can also be on other people's reactions. So if we believe that we will get rejected by someone we're romantically interested in, we might scan their faces for any signs of rejection. Or if we are part of a friend group and we want to fit in, we might scan for signs of them not finding us interesting or not want to hang out with us anymore. If we're doing business, we might be looking for signs of people not showing interest in our product and our services and so on. Then there are also a lot of negative maladaptive coping behaviors that people with low self-esteem tend to use. So if I have self-critical thoughts about being unintelligent and I ruminate about that for quite some time, that makes me insecure, I might try to compensate by working more. If I put in more effort in my work, then they will not notice the mistakes that I make and they will not think that I'm unintelligent. Another maladaptive coping behavior is to procrastinate. We might procrastinate to get on with things, to get on with projects at work, to get on with, to answer emails, answer texts, to go out date, to ask people to hang out. There are a lot of things we might procrastinate on doing. So let's say if I deep down think about myself as someone unintelligent and I procrastinate to work on an important project that could be very important for my career, the benefits of doing that, of procrastinating doing that, is to avoid facing the fact that maybe I am unintelligent. I'd rather just think that than go on, start this project, and maybe find out that I am unintelligent. So procrastination is a maladaptive coping behavior that we use to avoid coming to terms with our self-critical thoughts. So all of these unhelpful coping strategies, both the rumination, the worry, the threat monitoring, and the maladaptive coping behaviors, do have a lot of negative consequences. Amongst them, feeling not good about ourselves, to have low self-esteem. However, there are also a lot of other negative side effects connected to using these strategies. One of them being shame. If we constantly dwell on self-critical thoughts about not being good enough, saying stupid things, not being intelligent, not being attractive, that creates a lot of shame. And for some people, this comes across as chronic shame, that they're always ashamed of themselves. But the shame is a consequence of constantly ruminating about the things that we don't like or are ashamed of about ourselves. And then comes embarrassment, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, fear of being a failure, imposter syndrome, fear of being found out. So it makes sense. If we constantly criticize ourselves and dwell on these self-critical thoughts that we have, our self-esteem is going to suffer and we're not going to go out and do things that could make us risk being rejected or fail, which is the way to improve in life, by the way, is to keep trying and failing and learning and trying again. However, avoiding those things creates a lack of progress in life. If someone is interested in going out and finding a romantic partner, they may hold themselves back from going out and dating because they're afraid of getting rejected and facing failure. The lack of progress also shows in different areas other than dating and romantic relationships. For example, if someone is interested in starting a business and they don't do that because they're afraid of failing, this will stop this person from pursuing that dream of starting a business. Or if someone is interested in getting a promotion or getting other interesting projects to work on, or making new friends, or exploring different parts of themselves, or learning different things, they might hold themselves back for fear of failing, for fear of being found out, for fear of coming to terms with the things that they deep down believe about themselves. For example, that they are not worthy, they're not good enough, they're not intelligent, they're not attractive, they're not interesting, and so on. So one of the consequences of engaging in these strategies and engaging with our self-critical thoughts is lack of progress in life and not getting on with things. So from that perspective, it does make sense to try to improve and boost self-esteem, because no one wants to feel that way. No one wants to feel depressed, insecure, and feel like they're not getting on with life. They're being stagnant and they're not progressing. The question is if all the effort that we put into boosting self-esteem is worthwhile, and whether there are other things we should do instead. Back in the days when I worked with clients by helping them change some of their negative self-critical thoughts with more realistic ones, I kept encountering clients telling me, well, it doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel true. It feels true when I think I'm not good enough or that I'm uninteresting, but it doesn't feel true when I think I am an interesting person. Nowadays, when I look back at these experiences, I do understand why. The problem was not having the self-critical thoughts. The problem was the amount of time they tended to engage with these self-critical thoughts. So what we know about thoughts is that they are quite fleeting. So all the thoughts that we think throughout the day, they come and they go. They pop up and they go away seconds later. This is the nature of thoughts. They're brief, they come and they go on their own. We don't need to change them. We don't need to push them away. We don't need to do a lot to them because they have their own life. And luckily, they don't matter much. They're very, very brief. So looking at self-critical thoughts, they're no different than all these thoughts that we experience. Having a self-critical thought that I am unintelligent is no different than all the other thoughts that pop up and go away. However, people with low self-esteem feel that these thoughts they think about themselves are quite chronic. They're there all the time and they feel true. And the reason why this feels true is because they've spent a lot of time dealing with that thought. So every time a self-critical thought pops up, for example, I'm unintelligent, and I keep grabbing onto that one. I try to change that to something positive, or I try to push it away, or I worry about the consequences of being found out. Then of course I'm engaging with that thought. And what happens is that this thought remains more in my consciousness than it should. It doesn't just pop up and go away, it stays there for a long period of time. However, just because something feels true, it doesn't mean that it is true. In reality, us taking them as facts and spending time on thinking about them, worrying about them, pushing them away, acting on them, will make us believe in them more. Luckily, it doesn't have to be that way, and we can go back to a state where we just experience these beliefs about ourselves as thoughts. So if we reduce some of these strategies, or most of these strategies we use when we engage with our self-critical thoughts, if we spend less time worrying about them, if we spend less time ruminating about them, monitoring for threats and so on, and act on them, then we will at some point go back to just experiencing them as thoughts that don't necessarily always trigger a strong emotional reaction, and that don't make us believe that they are true just because they come up. Most people I talk to who struggle with low self-esteem tell me that, you know what, these thoughts don't feel like thoughts. I don't think about them as, oh, I just had a trigger thought. I think about them as the truth. I don't even question them. I don't think about them as being thoughts. To me, thinking that I'm unintelligent is just a fact. Therefore, the first step is to learn to recognize these thoughts because that's what they are. They feel true, they seem true, but they are just thoughts. So the first step is to learn to recognize them and just label them. So as you go about your day or prior to going into a situation where you know you get triggered or you are in a situation that provokes difficult emotions and thoughts, try to notice the type of thoughts that you're having. Even though they feel true, even though they seem like facts, see if you can just recognize them and label them. Let's say if you're in a dating situation, you're about to ask a girl out. See if you can recognize some of the thoughts you're having. She's going to say no, I am incompetent, she probably thinks that I'm unattractive, and so on. See if you can just label those thoughts. Oh, there's a trigger thought. Yes, it feels true. It's a trigger thought. When you become more aware and recognize these thoughts faster, try to postpone dealing with them until later. So we've talked about postponement before, to designate 15 minutes time later in the day. That's your rumination or worry time. During that time, you can worry, you can ruminate, you can think about your thoughts all you want. The rest of the day, you're giving your brain a break. So postponing to deal with your self-critical thoughts for later is going to be very, very helpful because you're not engaging with them. And if you keep doing that, at some point, you're going to train your brain to think that these thoughts are not that dangerous. They're not that important. So again, steps are to recognize that they are thoughts. So start noticing the type of thoughts that you have that feel as if they are true. And just label them in your head. Oh, there's a trigger thought. And then you can postpone dealing with them for later. I'm not going to dwell on this thought. I'm not going to worry about the consequences of she not finding me attractive. I'm going to deal with this thought later. Learning to deal with trigger thoughts like that is helpful. It's not only helpful when it comes to improving self-esteem, but it's also helpful in learning to control your mind, your reaction to negative thoughts, feelings, and events. So, as we talked about in the beginning of this video, learning self-control is a much better skill to develop if you want to succeed in life, if you want to feel better about yourself, if you don't want to develop mental illnesses and psychological problems. Instead of boosting self-esteem, trying to do positive affirmations, meditation, all kinds of different things to feel better about yourself, maybe a better investment of your time is to learn to deal with these trigger thoughts and feelings in a more helpful way. So instead of worrying, ruminating, engaging with them, doing things to change them, the best thing is actually to learn to recognize them and see them for what they are, just thoughts, and then postpone dealing with them and not deal with them altogether.